Good evening, everybody. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the education specialist for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Thanks for joining us tonight for our monthly movie discussion night. Before we get started, though, I would like to thank the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their support, with support for the foundation coming in the memory of Pat Finley. So thank you to the Finley family and to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation. We certainly enjoy all the virtual programs that we get to put on because of those two entities. To include movie nights just like this. So once again, thank you to them and thank you to all of you for showing up tonight, or at least both of you. It's fantastic. Tonight we are talking about the 1988 film The Beast, directed by Kevin Reynolds, who you might remember from Red Dawn and Waterworld, Kevin Costner flop. Sorry, no offense to Kevin Costner on that one. Cinematography was done by Douglas Milsom, and I'm really going to have to go back and rewatch some of the movies that he's done. I'm really becoming a fan of this guy. He was the cinematographer for Full Metal Jacket, but most notably in my mind anyway, he did a lot of assistant cinematography work for 3 Stanley Kubrick movies, The Shining, Clockwork Orange, and Barry Lyndon. And I think a lot of that, you can see that in this film. And we'll talk about some of that. And he also worked on The Last of the Mohicans with Daniel Day-Lewis. This film stars, I'm going to mess this up. I already started to. George Zunza, I think I'm saying that right. He was in Deer Hunter, No Way Out, and Crimson Tide. He was the chief of the boat in Crimson Tide. Jason Patrick as well as Kovachenko, and you might remember him from The Lost Boys. Stephen Bauer, he was Khan Taj, and he's most noted for his role in Scarface alongside Al Pacino. Stephen Baldwin, The Usual Suspects and Born on the 4th of July. And then also Eric Avari, who's one of my favorite actors. He always seems to get these great little parts. And he was Samad in the film, and you might have seen him in Stargate, Independence Day, and The Mummy. This was filmed entirely on location in Israel, and that's where they got the tanks from too. I'm sure we'll talk about that. It was distributed by Columbia Pictures, and it came out in September of 1988. And ironically, or maybe not ironically, unfortunately, I suppose, while they were filming, they had a change of studio heads. The original studio head, when the filming first kicked off, was very supportive of the film. The studio head that came in halfway through shooting of the film really didn't like the project very much, and that shows in its financials. Had a budget of $8 million. But only a box office receipt here in the U.S. of $161,000. That's a big loss for Columbia Pictures. The second studio had decided for a limited release, and if I'm not mistaken, it only premiered in 4 theaters throughout the whole U.S. And so that's why you have such a low box office turnout there. And it's based upon a play called Nanawate by William Mastrosimone. I'm not familiar with him. I would have liked to see the play. I'd like to see what was done with this on the stage and how they portrayed it. It's much easier to get a full visual sense when you're shooting a major motion picture. But to have this on the stage, I think would be really special to see and see how they turn that out. Quickly, Chris, we'll start with you. What did you think of the film? Had you seen it before?
I had not seen it before. Had not even heard of it before. I was impressed with it. I thought it was, it grabbed my attention throughout. I was watching it late at night, and at a time when I'm, sometimes kind of dozing a little bit when I'm watching a movie. But it pretty well riveted me throughout. So I liked it. I thought it was a good choice. The thing that I found sort of, it was difficult to, in some respects, was trying to reconcile Soviet soldiers speaking English.
Yeah, okay.
And then switching over to the Mujahideen, having them speaking presumably Pashto or whatever they were speaking, but only having intermittent translations of it. I mean, I had the subtitles on the whole time, and it was disconcerting to have them talking in their language and not knowing what they were saying. Sort of like sort of like Kovachenko or Konstantin, saying, I don't understand what you're saying. I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, I don't understand what you're saying either. But on the whole, I mean, I thought the movie worked really well.
Did you pick up the film after we decided to screen it for this program, Chris?
Yeah, I picked up the DVD.
Okay, because my DVD version has full Pashtun translations.
Mine didn't have those translations in it.
But see, I bought my DVD probably 15 years ago, perhaps.
Okay.
And I had read in a couple different reviews that depending on where you get your DVD from and when it was produced, some of them did not have the full translation. So that is unfortunate.
Yeah, they had intermittent translations, and I didn't know what the rationale was for when they translated, when they didn't.
Yeah, that's a shame, especially when it comes to like some of the things that Mustafa says to Taj.
Yeah.
It's really quite funny. So if you didn't get any of that, yeah, you really are missing out on some aspects of the film.
Yeah, I got mine a couple of months ago through Amazon.
Okay. Matthew, what did you think of the film? And you are muted, just to let you know. No? Okay, no problem. I have been in love with this movie for many years. I was first introduced to it when I was in Germany waiting to go over to Desert Storm. As Chris, as you know, and Matthew, maybe, I don't think you've joined us before. I was a tanker in the U.S. Army for just a little over 8 years. And so this was kind of like standard viewing for us. And if I'm not mistaken, this is one of the first films that really shows what it's like to be on a tank crew, both inside and outside of the tank. We've seen a lot of outside of the tank depictions, Kelly's Heroes with Oddball and some other films. But this one was serious about how it portrayed tankers, the fire commands, the reactions that you get, what you're doing in the turret or doing in a hull as the driver. And so not only did we watch this a lot in the barracks, this was a barrack staple, but particularly when we were over in Desert Storm, there was times when we really didn't have anything to do, especially after the ground war stopped. And I remember our first sergeant had requisitioned an Iraqi trailer, and he outfitted it with a refrigerator and a TV and a DVD player. And so this was common for us to watch. I've been familiar with this film since probably 1990. And yeah, it's amazing how many people have not heard of it. As a matter of fact, I just saw Secretary Kolar, who had joined us earlier in our screenings. She's the former Department of Veteran Affairs Secretary, and she was surprised. She had not heard of it either, and she was raving about it. I wish she was on tonight to join us. But yeah, a lot of people have not heard of this, and I'm sure it's from that limited release and the change of studio heads, and it just didn't get that much traction here in the U.S., much less anywhere else.
I think the closest we've seen to anything like this was Fury.
Yeah, but Fury came out, just
Sure.
much more recently.
Oh yeah.
This was 88, sorry.
Right.
So yeah, like I said, this is one of the first, at least as far as I know, one of the first true depictions of life in an armor, life in an armor crew. Fury did a good job too. I think there's aspects of Fury that are maybe a little more accurate. And like you said, Chris, with the Russians just speaking straight English, not even an accent to be found anywhere. This is not how a Russian crew would give their tank commands, as it's depicted. This is what an American tank crew would do, and Israelis as well, because they train with Americans so often. But still, those little points aside, I've always been enamored with this film. It's one of my favorites, and it's simply because I was a tanker and this is a tank movie. The film opens up, and this also really, this little piece also really got me the first time I saw it, when it opened up with the Rudyard Kipling quote from The Young British Soldier, a poem from his from 1889, if I'm not mistaken. He wrote this while he was over in India, right next to Afghanistan. So what did you think of that opening quote, Chris? Especially when you know it's coming from, before the year 1900, and here we are now in 1981. So, it's almost 100-year difference, but the poem still holds its validity when you think about what different occupying forces go through in Afghanistan.
Yeah, what came to mind was something that I'd heard about Afghanistan, that was where invasions went to die. And this seemed to kind of connect all the way across the generations. It really came to, you start off with that and you come full circle to very near the end when the women show up after having gone after the tank commander and killed him, and she shows up with all the blood on her, and there you get it, and the women come out to cut up your remains.
Yeah, that was,
couldn't have been more prescient and more accurate.
Yeah, I've like I said, I've always loved that opening quote. We lost our other member there, so it's just you and I now, Chris. Yeah, I've always thought it's been, it was really relevant, and like you said, especially when you come full circle and wrap it around to the end, when the tank commander, Daskal, he gets obliterated by those women, and they just come back with his bloody clothes. He probably should have just rolled onto his rifle. Although, as we see throughout the film, that's not in his nature at all.
No, he's not somebody who surrenders. Even when that would be the better part of valor, really.
Right. Yeah. No, his tenacity and his dedication to his tank, it maybe goes just a little too far for Tank Boy there.
Yeah.
So the opening shot, we have this Afghan village. It's early in the morning. People are starting to come around and work on, their necessaries for the day. And then all of a sudden the Russian tankers are preceded by artillery. And then the tank crews come in and go to obliterating the town completely. And when they come out of the tanks, they're wearing their gas masks. And one of the questions I had is, what kind of symbolism do you see as these tank crewmen are coming out of the tanks?
They look very foreign.
Almost like devils.
They look like aliens.
Yeah.
And I think that, from the Afghani point of view, that's exactly what they were.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I thought was that they wore the gas mask because the symbolism of the gas mask could also be that a symbol of their contempt for the Afghanis themselves. That they smelled, they didn't want the odor of the Afghanis around them, and so they were filtering it out. But the appearance of them coming out, it really struck me as kind of almost a sci-fi kind of alien. Shortly before watching this, I had been watching War of the Worlds.
Okay.
And both the Tom Cruise and the Gene Barry versions, and so aliens were kind of on my mind, I guess, at that point. But they just look like, particularly the type of gas mask they were wearing.
Yeah, it is striking. Not only is this town attacked, and there's some ruthless activities that go on, atrocities, one might say, and then to have them come out of the tanks, looking like they did. Whoever was left in that town had to be absolutely horrified. First of all, just to see a whole tank platoon rolling in and destroying their village. And I kind of made a note about that. Not that I want to get into the political aspects at all, but when I was watching it and writing my notes, I was trying to compare the two different approaches, Russia's approach and our approach. And Russia had a total war approach. We're just going to go through and destroy everything we see, and we're gonna force you to submit. And the American approach was, to win the hearts and the minds, and try to be able to find Al Qaeda that way by using the local population. Neither worked, and like you said, Chris, Afghanistan is where invasions go to die, and I don't know what other approach you could take. I don't think there is another approach. Honestly.
Yeah, I thought it was they did a nice job setting up that attack by showing sort of this very calm Pacific kind of life that was going on at the time, and then all of a sudden it just being blown up. I mean, you're left with the question, given what you see preceding the attack, is why did they come after that village? And I mean, they sort of get to that because they show that a number of the rebels, as they call them, one might say they're homeland defenders, lived there, but there was no indication that anything had actually been going on with them that would have precipitated that attack. And I thought, and the other thing that struck me was, as you say, it was a total war approach, which, as I was watching, I was thinking, how many war crimes have been committed right in that attack?
Oh, sure.
You know, just watching it, it was, I mean, it was really horrific. Just watching it proceed.
Yeah, I mean, they were firing tank rounds into all the buildings. You know, you come through with a flamethrower and just, throw some flames in there. You don't know if there's anybody in there or not. RPGs into the minarets, and then, the poisoning of the well, the killing of the animals. And then, of course, probably the most horrific scene in the whole film, right up in front loaded into the picture itself, is the guy getting run over by the tank.
Right.
And that could be a really hard scene to watch.
Yeah. Well, there was that kind of.
Just a second, Chris. Michael, welcome. Michael. Okay, sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the scene was in being crushed under the tank treads. I had some recollection that there were reports of similar things happening, our troops doing that in Vietnam.
I certainly hope not.
Yeah, I hope not too, but I just have a recollection that there were accounts of that happening on some occasions. There were also stories of people being thrown out of helicopters, the Viet Cong being thrown out of helicopters in Vietnam.
I mean, as a former American tanker, we kind of hold ourselves to sort of a code of honor.
Yeah.
And that's certainly, doing something like that just definitely betrays,
Sure.
everything that we were about. Even when I was watching it, we were in Desert Storm, or we were just in the barracks. Every time that scene came up, we all just kind of cringed.
Yeah.
There's just no way that we would ever do that. And so I hope that, any rumors of that happening in previous conflicts are just that. I hope they're rumors.
Yeah.
I had not heard that before. And I'm not so sure I want to go investigate, because maybe I don't want to know the answer.
I thought the thing about that scene, I was really struck by how realistic they made it. I mean, you literally see him, the body going underneath, and it looks like it's still alive as the tread's going over it.
Oh yeah, no, his eyes are still open, and his arms are out.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you get a quick glimpse of the aftermath.
Yeah.
And it's just, my goodness, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
We were always taught that was one of the safest points to be, or one of the points where they taught the most safety at, is around the tank track, especially when the tank is running. And I just can't imagine being caught up in there like that. Poor Jeremy Renner, right?
Yeah.
And then kind of moving on to the point that you just had, Chris, about why they attacked this particular town. I asked the question about the relationship between Taj and Mustafa. And quite honestly, I've always looked at it as they were looking for Mustafa's little crew. And maybe they had some intelligence that he was moving in and out or around this town. That probably wouldn't be very accurate intelligence, because they didn't seem to be very friendly to him, even though they are family, kind of distantly related, but they're still family. But what is that? What kind of dynamic are we looking at between Taj and Mustafa, especially in the beginning?
Well, I kind of thought that it was like the equivalent of sibling rivalry. I mean, Taj was going to become the Khan, the king, Mustafa seemed to, revel in his leadership. And I think there might have been some resentment about that Taj Khan was going to have a role that maybe Mustafa felt that he should really have. I think Mustafa also saw Taj as not sufficiently dedicated to the cause. I mean, Mustafa just seemed to be prepared to do anything, and I don't think he thought that Taj was prepared to go to that length to defend Afghanistan.
Yeah, and Mustafa in particular had that one line, and I don't know if it came across in your subtitles or not, but I can't remember what Taj said, but Mustafa says, basically, well, then if you're not willing to do all this, go to Pakistan.
Yeah, that was in the subtitles.
He's basically saying, if you're not man enough, get out of the country and leave the fighting to those of us who are.
Yeah.
And there seemed to be also in the subtitles, they alluded a couple times to some sort of past vendetta between the two clans. So when Mustafa comes up, he's basically saying, let's call a truce. Let's put this behind us and work together to fight this tank. Maybe the play goes a little more into, the background of that, but certainly there's a lot of tension. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned that maybe Mustafa doesn't think that Taj is ready or fit to be Khan. And even Taj questions himself several times throughout the film, which I thought was kind of just a cool thread that they kept coming back to throughout the film. That kind of self-doubt, and this is his trial pretty much, which.
And I think later on, was it his uncle who said, the fact that you asked that question shows that you're prepared to be the Khan.
Yeah. If you're questioning yourself, then you're kind of in the right mindset to take over and think things through rationally, perhaps.
Yeah.
So the tank does take off from the village, and just one of my favorite. It's a nothing line. There's nothing to it at all. But Daskal is telling Constantine, right fork driver, and you can see everybody off to the left. And he goes, are you sure about that? Right fork driver, that's what I said. And of course, that was the wrong answer. They ended up getting lost in the valley of, what is that? The Valley of the Jackal. Yes. Yeah. And once again, we see Douglas Milsom's cinematography come into play as he's filming the walls of the valley. And it almost looks like an aerial view of the trail that goes through it until he kind of pulls back and you see that's actually the wall of the valley. And I just thought that's such an amazing shot.
Yeah. I thought maybe a cartographer had gone in and carved that up for them.
Yeah, no, exactly right. But yeah, no, he really found some great geographic features to use. And just throughout the whole film, I'm just really impressed with what he found and what he shot while he was out there, and particularly the nighttime scenes. They lit it so well, and they just really brought a lot out of the desert. I don't know, maybe I have a little bit of affinity for deserts, living in Las Vegas and being over in Iraq. But I was really impressed with how Doug Milsom shot this film. Like I said, I want to go back and look at some of his other films again. These are films that I've seen, but I just never tied the cinematographer together.
Yeah.
So now I want to go through it and look at those threads again. So the tank is lost, and they stop to take a look at the map. And this is when we first really meet Samad. And I've always been really curious about why Samad is there. Why is this Afghan national fighting with the Russians against his own people? And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, Chris.
I couldn't figure that out either. I mean, it was just, I think there was something probably intellectual about it. He talks about having gone to the university, and this was some way of maybe figuring out, what the Russians were about and whether they might, even ultimately help the country. but he was a real puzzle in that regard, I thought.
Yeah.
I can see why Daskal didn't trust him. I mean, any more than I think he just regarded anybody who would. I mean, I think he regarded that if you were Afghani and you were helping the Russians, there had to be something, some kind of subterfuge going on, and he
just prone to being a traitor in general, I suppose.
Right. Yeah.
You're betraying your own people.
Right.
And then, he wasn't trusted at all. It seemed like everything he touched, kind of went to pot. And it really reminded me of a Jonah type of character, much like you would see, the young lieutenant in Master and Commander. I can't recall his name, but it's just everything he touched, just it was messed up, and it messed everything else up. And then, in thinking on why Samad was there, it really got me thinking about his role in general, and why was that role even necessary? That tank only holds 4 crewmen. I'm not quite sure where they're putting the 5th crewman at.
Yeah.
So from a technical standpoint, it doesn't make sense. And then almost from just a narrative standpoint, it kind of doesn't make sense either. Although I did like his character.
The closest I could figure was that somehow he was going to act as a translator at some point.
He did a little bit at the beginning, and maybe he was just the conduit to explain the 3 tenets, especially Nanawate, which came into play so heavily at the end.
Yeah.
Maybe just they didn't have any other way to explain what those were, and so they just needed an Afghan in there to do.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best explanation for his presence, because otherwise you don't get that link that then Constantine's able to come up with in order to salvage his life.
Yeah. And speaking of Constantine, what kind of soldier is he?
I think he's the ambivalent soldier. He believes in the cause, but up to a point. But there comes a point where he probably thinks that the way it's being executed is going too far.
Yeah, but in the beginning, in the opening scene, when they're destroying the village, he's the one that RPGs the minarets.
Yeah, I don't think that he thought that was going too far.
Okay.
It's when you're going to run over somebody.
Yeah.
You start seeing it's too far, and I think that I sort of got the sense that was where he really began to wonder about Daskal and Daskal's mental health.
Yeah, there's definitely some issues with his mental health there. What did you think of George Zunda's character, Daskal? How did you like his portrayal of that?
Well, I thought his portrayal was quite well done of that kind of character. I didn't like the character, of course.
Oh yeah, of course.
I mean, but I thought that he pulled off that kind of I don't know exactly what word to use for it, but he was a zealot. I mean, he was as much a zealot for his cause as the Afghanis were for their cause. So, I mean, he was basically the kind of counterpoint you want in a movie like this for the other side. I mean, they play off against each other. You have the I will say that he was the character that made me feel something that I never thought I would feel, which was sympathy for the Mujahideen.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
Because if anybody who's fighting, who has to encounter a character like that, you have to a certain extent, you have to respect them for realizing that they've got to fight what they've got to fight there.
Yeah, and I made a note here too about just how visually striking the disparity is, at least in the film, between the technologies that both sides are using. You've got the Russians with their helicopters and their tanks and their chemical weapons, and then you've got the Afghan women with stones and a couple grenades. They didn't have the RPG until the one female broke it out. all they really had was the Enfield rifles, and they're trying to fight a modern day war like that. It just really struck me that how different both of those sides are, and yet they were still able to keep the Russians at bay for nearly 10 years before they had to withdraw. Just amazing, simply amazing.
And the thing is, the reference to the stones and so on is they kept coming back to the David and Goliath stone.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah, and the holy man as well. He kept making reference to that too. You're absolutely right.
So I in a sense, I think they were using that as motivation.
So we were talking about Dosgal and Samad, and talking about the distrust, between the tank commander and his crewmen. And then, Dosgal kills Samad as he's, telling him to go and see how deep the river is, and, what kind of bedding it has. Is it sand or is it stone? And then he just machine guns him down. Why do you think he did that?
I think he'd finally come to the point where he just decided he couldn't take it. He couldn't tolerate Samad being around anymore. He'd always distrusted him. And I think he saw this as basically the point at which to get it over with. He was going to do it one way or the other at some point. Might as well do it earlier rather than later. But I think like your next question, what effect did it have on the crew? I think it was one of the things that, for instance, when they get to the point with Constantine and they're going to tie him down, and he keeps yelling to have for what's his name to keep coming back.
Anton,
yeah. I think that what Dosgal did to Samad was in their minds. Yeah, I want to help you, Constantine, but he's going to kill me if I don't do this. He's crazy enough to do that. And the fact that that Dosgal had ordered this on Constantine indicated how crazy he was.
Yeah. Certainly, killing Samad did have an effect on Constantine. It had to have an effect on Anton. And I can't recall the gunner's name, but he seemed just willing to go along with anything throughout the whole film, except for at the end when he's in the helicopter. But he just, I don't know. I really didn't like his character. I mean, I liked the portrayal, but you could have told him to do anything, and he would have been like, "Yes, sir, I'm going to go do it." No moral compass at all.
Yeah. Well, I think and that's one of the things that I think about this movie is that it gives you the range of the morality, the moral calculus of the various participants. You get Dosgal on one end, who apparently has no moral qualms about anything. You get Constantine sort of in the middle, and then you get that other character whose name we can't remember, who basically say how high and do you want me to jump?
Yeah. Maybe this film should be mandatory viewing for any army that wants to go into Afghanistan,
or maybe any war at all.
Yeah, no, fair point. And so we're also talking about Dosgal having Constantine tied to the rock, having his head booby trapped. I mean, just cold-blooded and ruthless. To leave somebody out there is one thing, but to tie him up and then booby trap his head with a grenade, that's just insane.
I have a question.
Sure.
I didn't understand the mechanism of the grenade. Because when I thought that the projection out of the end of the grenade was somehow the trigger for it, and
yeah, so
that would do something. It's not like our grenades where you have the handle, you pull the pin, you still hold the handle.
I think that's. I'm not sure how technically accurate that was, but that was the sense behind the booby trap, is that he pulled the pin. And Constantine's head was holding the spoon in place. As soon as he moved his head, the spoon would pop, and the booby trap would be set. And that's what kind of happened with the dogs, except he was able to, fortunately shake it off. You do have that small delay, and so I guess that was just enough for him to shake it off and have it roll down and kill the dogs instead of him. But I think that was once again that's one of those technical aspects that I think was maybe more Americanized. And I think that was the whole purpose behind the booby trap itself.
Yeah.
And I think we've kind of covered this, but I just want to ask the question and kind of maybe get into it a little bit more. Daskal, is he a psychopath or is he a loyal, dedicated soldier? And I guess when you ask it like that, is there a difference sometimes?
Well, I don't know. I don't. Yeah, that was my question. I don't know. It's necessarily an or. I think it's like, yeah, he's a psychopath, and at the same time, he's a loyal soldier. I mean, you could be a psychopath and not be loyal in that sense. I think we haven't talked about this, but one of the characters in The Raid is kind of a psychopath, but you wouldn't think of him as really a loyal soldier.
Is that Lee Marvin's character?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But I as I was watching, when I saw your question, my thought was, there's really no, it doesn't have to be a distinction there. He's a psychopathic loyal soldier.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of brings up another question: is how do you spot the difference between a loyal soldier who is more moralistic and compassionate and the one who's not, like Daskal? I mean, and that's maybe more rhetorical than anything else. I don't think that's something that we could ferret out. Maybe once AI kicks in and we can really go into people's brains and discover things that they're not, even familiar with themselves about. But I
don't know that. You often can't know that until you're actually faced with a circumstance that puts you in that situation. I mean, there were those. I'm trying to remember who the guy was, the academic who did these. The whole experiment where they took volunteers and made some of them prisoners and some of them guards. And the guards suddenly took on, they were just ordinary people, and then they got a little bit of power and they started basically brutalizing the volunteers who were prisoners because they could do so. And it's sort of like the notion about, well, I think Michelle Obama said this about the presidency. She said, the presidency doesn't change you, it reveals you. And I think it's a similar dynamic for lots of these positions, lots of these jobs that we have, that if you have jobs that have where moral issues come up, you'll find out who you are when that happens, when you're confronted.
I like that quote. I just wrote it down. That makes more sense than probably half the stuff I heard at university. It doesn't change you, it reveals you. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in law school, that was my feeling, that there were always these people who said, well, all these people changed when they got to law school. My feeling always was, no, it never changed them. It just revealed who they were down underneath. And a good education is what does that. It brings you to confront yourself and figure out who and what you are and want to be.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Absolutely. So Constantine's tied to the rock. He's able to shake off the booby trap. The women come up and they start to stone him. That would be a horrible way to go, to be stoned. Oh my God. Fortunately, the men come along, they stop them. Before the men come along, just before the men come along, Constantine starts to call for Nanawate. He starts to call for sanctuary. And the head female, I can't even say her name. She's just absolutely shocked. She stops dead in her tracks, and she's just looking around everywhere like, how does he know this? I just thought that was a great little scene. I think the actress who played her, she played that spot on. I thought that was just
yeah. And she was also the one that led the attack on Daskal at the end.
Yeah, and that was the wife of, or the soon-to-be wife of Shazman, the guy who got run over by the tank. So
Right.
she certainly had, reason for badal or revenge.
Yeah.
But to hear this Russian call out one of the tenets of their religious practices just really shocked her. It also shocked Taj as well when he came up. But why do you think they honored that request for sanctuary after everything that had been done?
Well, the women didn't want to.
No,
That was the
certainly
thing. So it was clear they didn't. But I think Taj, when he comes up, he's the leader, and I think he sees this as an instance in which he has to exercise leadership consistent with the principles of Islam. And if he doesn't, he not only betrays Islam, but he betrays his leadership qualities as well. So I don't think he necessarily wanted to. I think he felt obligated to, in the way that Samad had told Constantine and Constantine had even asked him, even if I'm the enemy, and he said, and Samad tells him, yes, I have to protect you, I have to feed you, I have to clothe you, and I think that's what Taj felt as well, that was so important to be consistent with their belief.
Yeah, and that's one of the scenes where you can see Taj start to become Khan. He starts to take, I don't know if that moral high ground is the right expression to use, but he starts to honor himself and honor his religion rather than this temporary, momentary act of revenge that's only going to make him feel better for a little bit. Mustafa's group certainly wants it. The females certainly want it. But yeah, he stops it, and the holy man is with him too. And this is one of the parts where the holy man brings up David and Goliath again. And he's reminding him, this is not how we are. If we do this, we're no better than the Russians.
Yeah.
And then the cave scene, so they
I wanted to say one. I thought it was kind of interesting that at that point too, because previously as I recall, the women had been told to go back to the village, and yet they did not go back. They had defied. So to a certain extent, I think that maybe Taj felt he had to exercise that authority as well to let them know that he was the boss, and they still had to accede to his authority.
I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a good point too. You're right. They weren't even supposed to leave the village initially, and they were caught by Taj's uncle, and he told them, go back. And they had a grenade in that block of C4. But then you're right. That was the first time that Taj and Mustafa and the rest of the crew, had seen the women out there following them. And no, that's a good point. He wants to set his rule down, and what better way to do it than doing the opposite of what everybody else says, because it's the right thing to do. And then we come to the cave scene, and Taj and Constantine, they really start to develop this relationship there, even though they are enemies. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I thought that was a really neat scene with Constantine helping them fix the RPG. Mustafa's upset, because he had to take a piece off of an infield to fix the RPG. And Mustafa's like, oh, great, he's ruined 2 of our weapons. It's wonderful. But it actually works out in the end. And as they would probably say in Afghanistan, it was the will of Allah.
Everything's the will of Allah. I thought that was interesting, particularly as they tried to establish their communication. Kaboom, and they literally create their own little sort of Creole to understand each other. So there was I don't know if you've ever seen The Fifth Element.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite films.
You have the scene where Jovanovich, the woman, she's going kaboom, and they're learning how to talk
Big bada
themselves.
boom.
Beginning, boom, yeah. And I was sort of, recurring to that as I was watching them try to establish this communication when neither of them spoke the other's language, and yet they were able to find it.
Yeah, and then I thought, when he gathered all the food and set it down in front of him, you could even see the look on Constantine's face. And as you're watching this for the first time, you're thinking, wow, that's really generous of them. They're going to sit there and watch this guy eat all their food like that. And then, as soon as he picks up his piece and takes a bite, everybody comes and just takes what they want. And I laugh every time at that.
Yeah.
Just
sort of the look on his face when he sees that they're taking all the rest of the food.
And yeah, Todd is telling him, come on, eat, not because he's trying to care for him. Nobody else can touch the food until he does,
Right.
And they're all hungry too.
Yeah.
So it's more selfish in a way. And I always liked that Kate. I always thought it was cool.
I thought in several of in that scene, in that setting, the camera would occasionally focus in on one of the rebels' faces, and the look of, it was almost like a look of puzzlement on their faces. They were wondering, what is this alien Russian creature going to do next? Is he going to help us? Is he going to hurt us? We just don't know. But there was this look of skepticism and curiosity all mixed in together.
And especially when he starts to gather the food, the first kid that he gets food from who's smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. The look on his face is just like, I can't believe you're asking me to give this guy food. Are you joking? Yeah, those little small parts, they really add to the whole film itself. It's just really well done all the way around, I thought.
Yeah, I think it was a big mistake for that new studio head to not give this the kind of support it deserved.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's become kind of a cult classic, an underground classic. And so hopefully that studio head has realized, maybe I made a mistake on that one. I don't know.
Maybe they should re-release.
Yeah, I think it'd be kind of bad timing right now.
Well, yeah.
And I do ask the question, how important is the role of the female villagers in the film? We've highlighted them several times. Not only do they come into play throughout the film, but they also have a role to play as well. And especially at the end, they are the ones who, kaboom the tank, basically,
Right.
Bringing down the landslide on top of them. I think there's a lot of scenes from a tanker point of view that I really like in this film, but I think that one at the end is maybe one of my favorites, simply because it shows that it doesn't matter what you bring to the combat field. If it's not maintained, if it's not cared for, whether it's people or equipment, they're not going to work anymore. And so this tank only has, a limited amount of whatever, fuel, oil, which it's leaking, so much of. They light it on fire. And the thing that really stops it is the track falls off.
Yeah.
And, that was one of the first things you learn in tank school, is that if you don't have tracks on your tank, you're not going anywhere. You're a sitting pillbox. And so I just thought it was really neat that they bring those small elements into the film. Some of these technical aspects don't make sense, like the grenade and the commands that they're giving in the tank and whatnot. But some of them are really detailed and really important. And I thought that was one of them. I really enjoyed that aspect.
Well, I thought one of the things that also built some of the tension was the depletion of their ammunition.
Yeah.
There came a point, we don't have any more bullets. Now we don't have any more, of the various kinds of artillery that he wants. And eventually they don't have any of it.
Yeah, and it keeps showing it little by little throughout. After Daskal shoots Samad, it's not too much longer that he wants to engage the Mujahideen with that same machine gun. He's got no rounds left. He used them on Samad. And then, they start to run out of tank rounds. And there's the one scene where he's giving fire commands and he tells them to load frag. And he said, we're out of frag. And he's like, fine, load whatever. Just put something in that gun tube. And it gets to the point where there's even nothing left to put in the gun tube.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've always had the hardest time with Daskal simply because of that. If he's the good tank commander that he's supposed to be, tank boy from World War II, you have to realize that you only have so much to give, and especially when you're talking about equipment. And once your equipment starts to fail, at some point you're going to have to realize and face the facts. And he should have faced the facts of the helicopter. But unfortunately he didn't. And he even, I like that scene as well, where both Anton and the gunner are on the helicopter, and he tells him to get back on the tank. And he goes and gets back on the tank himself, and he swings the machine gun to the helicopter, points it right at him. He's got no bullets left, but he's kind of playing a game of bluff there, and he wins.
Yeah, the thing that struck me about there was a point where Daskal talks about being an 8-year-old with the Nazi, fighting off the Nazi tanks.
I was waiting for this to come up.
Yeah, and of course that means he was in his mid-40s by the time this is occurring. So he's no spring chicken. I mean, he's obviously been through this in the Soviet military. He would have been through this for many, many years. So that you would think that he would have had a better sense of how to conserve ammunition, how to just how to run an operation where you're isolated and you're being surrounded, and you got to find a way out of it. But he seemed to be, for all that experience, he seemed to be terribly reckless.
Yeah, yeah, and not to mention the fact that that's kind of a plot flaw, that he's almost 50 years old. Had spent all this time in the Russian military. Well, he would have been retired by then.
Yeah,
you're not going to spend 40 years in the military, even as a general. Well, maybe a general, perhaps. But yeah, it kind of put him outside of the age range where he really should have been. We are closing in on the end of the hour, and quite honestly, I'm surprised. I mean, I'm not surprised. It's just never been the two of us before.
right.
And this hour has gone by just as fast as if there were all of us here. So, kudos to you and I. And especially with a film like this, there's a lot to talk about, and it's easy to talk about because it's such a good film. We talked about some of the cinematography. Oh yes, I wanted to ask, so Kevin Reynolds, the director, he said that this is his finest work that he's done, basically. And looking at some of the other films that he shot, especially Red Dawn and even Waterworld, even though it was a bust at the box office, it was still visually spectacular, and had a lot going for it, especially with the stars that it had. And I'm just curious, why do you think he holds this film in such high regard? And of course, we can't speak to what's on his mind, but I was just curious on what you thought.
I think that probably in this film there were a lot of challenges, that he probably didn't face in some other films. You had to deal with, language issues. You had to deal with reconciling cultural issues. You had to make Russian-speaking English believable. The question about speaking the Pashto.
Oh yeah, the difficulty of trying to learn that kind of language for a film.
I mean, so you've got all these challenges, and I think he had to be pretty proud of being able to pull all that together in a film that I mean, it grabbed me. I didn't know what to expect, but it really pulled me into it. And as each scene came along, it seemed to be as a whole a very well-made film, and each part of it led into the next part, logically, cinematically. So I could see why he would be especially proud of having gotten this done.
Yeah, and like you said, the film as a whole stands. There's a lot of movies out there where this scene is great, and maybe half of the movie is great, but there's always those small parts where it's just why was that in there? How that didn't make any sense. All the way through this film from start to finish, it holds you. And I've never met a person who's seen this film and said, I didn't really like it very much. Everybody I've met who has seen this film, they were like, yeah, that is a great war film.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that it just doesn't get more recognition, sadly.
Yeah. I kind of wish that, I mean, I guess your version or your DVD or whatever had more translation in it than mine did. And I'm not sure why that would be, but I think it might have been better if there'd been a way to, the only way I could think to improve it would have been to have the Russians speaking Russian and having it translated, in subtitles. Because I kept having to remind myself that these were Russian soldiers, not American soldiers.
I'm just glad they didn't try to do it with a really bad Russian accent. I mean, if
Right.
you're
Yes.
either going to go all the way or don't go anywhere at all.
No, I understand.
Go ahead with your American accents. That's fine. It's film. You suspend some beliefs,
Right.
some realities because you're watching a movie. So yeah, I'm glad it wasn't just really bad Russian accents. I'm not so sure how bad the Pashtun was. Probably not great, but I enjoyed them speaking it anyway, and I appreciate the effort that the actors put into learning them.
Yeah, I think one of the when I was looking at this on IMDb, then I was going down through, and I was looking at the part about goofs, the errors. One of them indicated that the women were actually speaking Hindi. So, but who knows? But it's sort of, I didn't, in some of the other movies we've seen, like, World War I or World War II movies where they have Germans and they're speaking English. I have less problem, maybe because I just, it's easier to see them speaking English than Russians speaking English the way they did.
And it's funny, I've had the rare opportunity, probably maybe half a dozen times, to be watching a film that had foreign languages in it, an American film with foreign languages, and be with somebody who was of that nationality. And I always enjoy, saying, hey, is this really what they're saying? Is this really what you guys would say? And it's been about half and half so far. The Hunt for Red October, though, I understand they do a really good job with the Russian in that. I had a chance to watch it with a Russian, and he said every word for word, at least at what they had in the beginning until they switched over into English, was exactly perfect Russian. So I was kind of impressed.
Speaking of translation, there's a scene earlier on, and I think we've seen this in a couple of other movies, where Samad's asked to translate something and it's basically he doesn't want something bad to happen, so he gives them the wrong translation.
Yeah,
I forget
his own version of what they said.
Right. Yeah. It sort of reminds me. I think there was a Saturday Night Live routine where there was some one of the characters is going on in a foreign language and going on and on and on and on, and the translator says yes. And so I thought that Samad, talking about languages, I mean, I think that was he saw that as part of his job, to be sort of a mediator in difficult situations, even if it meant dissembling about what was actually going on.
Yeah, I would agree. Absolutely.
You had a question here about the score, and I thought there were, particularly in the scenes as they were trying to escape, get to the entrance to the valley to get out. The score reminded me of some of the 1980s, the very, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but scores that would accompany chase scenes in movies.
Kind of keyboardy and
very keyboardy, and which I thought was kind of an interesting choice for what they were showing on the screen. I thought the score the soundtrack was well done. I think that the score the music complemented very well what was going on, and was very understated in that regard.
Yeah, and that's why I put that question there. I thought so as well. It kind of focused you on the tension, whether it's between the opposing sides or just between opposing people. And yeah, it's just one of the things that I always remember. I can hear the score in my head right now. You know, and even if I don't watch this movie for 5 years, I'll still be able just to hear that if I think about it. And in some spots, it's rather haunting, especially when mixed with the cinematography. Of course, in my last and most favorite question, who was your favorite character and why?
I really couldn't choose one when it came right down to it. The closest I could come was basically Constantine, because he was he was kind of like aside from Daskal, Constantine was kind of the pivotal character in this whole thing because of his sense of morals, trying to reconcile what he was doing and what he was being asked to do and what he thought he should do. And I thought that the character was presented quite well in that regard. So that was the closest I could come to a favorite, but it wasn't by a lot.
Okay.
This struck me as more of an ensemble kind of movie.
Yeah,
that all of the characters had to work together, or the movie wouldn't work at all.
Right. You know, I'll go with the less obvious choice. My favorite character was the tank. You know, we've talked about this before. Character doesn't always have to be, you know, an actor. It can be something that is in the movie as well constantly. And you know, the tank was my favorite portion of it, and just watching it, you know, deplete itself and crumble throughout the film. I'm sure this is going to sound very strange, but I almost cared about it. You know, and at the end, when it was basically killed, it was kind of sad for me. But if I had to choose a human, an actor, I really liked, and it wasn't very big, but I really liked Mustafa's role. He had something about him, some attitude, some guts. You know, he wasn't the most moral person. He was called a scavenger at one point, and he totally was. Weak for Russian junk, but I really liked his role. And I can't remember the gentleman's name. I didn't write it down, unfortunately. He's been in a couple other things I've seen, and I also noticed that he was in a couple episodes of Seinfeld. And I do have all the entire series of Seinfeld, so I do want to go and check those episodes out and just kind of watch Mustafa interact with Elaine. It's going to be kind of weird. But yeah, I guess if I had to pick an actor, it would be Mustafa.
Speaking of non-human characters, I think you could say the map.
Oh yeah,
because you know, you see the map and you see that area that's kind of burned out in the map, and it's not until they get to that location that you realize that's also the valley that they can't cross, the canyon. So.
Yeah, no, I did that. That was a great little plot line, I thought.
Yeah.
You know, and you're right. We're just right where that was burned out. There should be a road that goes right across there. The Kandahar Road is right there. Right. We can see trucks driving on it.
Yeah.
But now you have this huge chasm that you just can't get across, and it was only validated by the helicopter pilots.
Right.
You know, Daskal still thought there was a way around, and they told him no, you're not getting around. The only way back is the way you just came. And just the look on his face when they told him that. I think George Zinda did a really good job on his character.
I also thought the irony of the helicopter crew later dying at the poisoned well, that had been poisoned by their own troops.
Yeah.
was an interesting touch.
Yeah, had they got on the helicopter and, you know, called in a strike on the tank, he would have not only saved his crew, which a couple of them were saved, well, 3 of them rather, but he would have been able to save the helicopter pilots or the helicopter crew as well.
Yeah.
But he was too selfish. He was just concerned about him and his tank, and that was it. Next month for February, Chris, we're going to go to your recommendation. We're going to watch Foxhole from 2021. I still have not seen it yet. Maybe I'll watch it this weekend as we're kind of hunkered down with the snowstorm we're supposed to get tomorrow. But I'm really looking forward to it. I've read some reviews. I've looked it up online. It seems like it's going to be a really interesting movie. I'm looking forward to watching this. So we will see everybody in February, if not sooner, for trivia.